Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The ticking of the clock on the oak-paneled wall echoed through the silent office, like a slow, deliberate warning. Sophia sat upright on the edge of the leather chair, her knuckles pale from how tightly she gripped her notebook. The air in the notary's office was heavy, as if infused with the scent of old paper, authority, and final decisions. Outside, Boston was cloaked in late autumn gray, the kind of sky that made everything feel heavier, more final. She was only 20, a law student, bright and determined, raised by a single mother who had done everything to give her a future. And now, that future stood in the balance, trapped inside a yellowed envelope sealed with wax. Mr. Whitlock, the family's longtime notary, sat across from her, his posture stiff, his fingers methodically opening the will of Charles Bennett, her grandfather, a man who had raised Sophia after her mother's passing, who had given her warmth in place of words, structure in place of chaos. And yet, even in death, it seemed he had one last condition. The estate, Whitlock said, adjusting his glasses without looking up, will be passed on to Miss Sophia Bennett in full, including the house at Chestnut Street and the Educational Trust, under one condition. Sophia held her breath. Her heart raced. She must be legally married to a man of unblemished reputation by her 21st birthday. Otherwise, the entirety of the inheritance reverts to the Bennett Foundation. The words fell like bricks on her chest. What? Sophia's voice cracked, a blend of disbelief and growing anger. He wants me to marry someone for money? It's not uncommon in old families, Whitlock replied with the indifference of someone who'd seen too much. He wanted to ensure your security, that you'd be protected. Protected, a word that felt more like a cage than a shield. I'm studying law. I can protect myself, she said. Whitlock finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then perhaps you'll use your education to find a way to fulfill this without compromising your integrity. She left the office with the letter clutched in her hand like a curse. The cold air outside bit her skin, but the chill she felt came from within. Marry in less than a year? How could her grandfather, a man who had encouraged her independence and drive, reduce her future to a marital status checkbox? The days that followed were a blur of anxiety, frustration, and dead ends. Her 21st birthday was 10 months away, not enough time to meet someone, build trust, fall in love, or even pretend. She didn't want a fake marriage, but neither could she walk away from the house that held every memory of her mother, from the scholarship fund that paid for her last year at Harvard. Her heart and mind battled in silence. Pride wrestled with fear until a knock came at her door. It was a messenger, well-dressed, polite, holding a letter embossed with the Bennett family seal. Inside was a name, a man, and an appointment. Nathan, the executor of the will, the legal guardian of the estate, and the man her grandfather had entrusted to advise and assist in fulfilling the final clause. Nathan was no stranger to Sophia, not directly, but his name carried weight like thunder in the legal world. A federal judge known for rulings that made headlines, for his moral code that bent for no one, unmarried, childless, and, according to what she could dig up online, living in a historic mansion on Beacon Hill. She didn't know why he agreed to meet, didn't know what he wanted. But when she stood at his doorstep that Friday afternoon, looking up at the towering stone facade of the Harrington estate, something inside her shifted a premonition, or perhaps the awareness that her life was about to split in two. Before Nathan, and after Nathan. The door opened before she could knock. A housekeeper with sharp eyes and soft hands invited her in. She walked through hallways lined with portraits and silence, the kind of silence that felt deliberate, curated, like the house itself had boundaries it didn't want crossed. He was waiting in the library, tall, composed, his gray suit impeccable, his dark hair slicked back, but it was his eyes that froze her steel blue, not cold but distant, controlled, as if warmth were something he had trained himself to hide. "Miss Bennett," he greeted, standing but not stepping forward. "Thank you for coming." She nodded. Her voice stuck somewhere in her throat. "Judge Harrington, Nathan will suffice. Sit, please." The room was full of books but lacked comfort. Everything was order, restraint, function over feeling, much like the man himself. "I understand your position," he said, cutting straight to the point, "and I won't waste your time. I am the executor. I have no say in the will's stipulations, but I am tasked with helping you fulfill them." She raised her chin. You think it's fair that I'm being forced to marry to access what should already be mine? He met her gaze. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or memory, but it vanished too quickly. I think fairness is a luxury the law rarely affords. A silence fell between them, not awkward, but dense, weighted. Then he added, I've reviewed your file, your grades, your work ethic, your independenceism. You deserve more than a transaction. That surprised her, but he continued, We can't change what's written. We can only navigate it. Her heart beat faster. What are you suggesting? He leaned back slightly. A marriage, one that fulfills the clause. Legal, binding, but with clear terms and an end date. She stared at him, stunned. You mean a marriage of convenience? Her breath caught. This couldn't be real. This wasn't law school. This was a contract written in emotion and circumstance. A stranger proposing a union without love, without romance, just legality. And yet, in his voice, there was no manipulation, no arrogance, just quiet, measured reason. You don't know me, she said, searching his face for signs of motive. I don't need to, he replied. I trust Charles Bennett, and he trusted you. A part of her wanted to scream, another part wanted to cry, but there was also a small, strange voice that whispered, This man is not what he seems. She rose slowly, unsure of whether she was saying goodbye or stepping into something irreversible. I'll think about it, she said, and he simply nodded, as if he already knew, one way or another. They were no longer strangers. The silence inside the Harrington residence was almost sacred. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from emptiness. It was the kind that demanded respect. Each ticking second echoed against the stone walls, each footstep softened by Persian rugs, each breath careful, measured, as if the house itself had rules that couldn't be broken. Sophia returned to the mansion 3 days after their first meeting, this time not as a visitor but as someone trying to decide whether she would let this man, this house, this arrangement shape her life. She wore a soft gray coat, buttoned to her throat, her hair pulled back neatly. Everything about her looked composed, except her eyes. They were restless, scanning the details of the place. The rich woodwork, the antique chandeliers, the scent of wax and old paper. Everything in here felt deliberate. Mrs. Carver, the discreet housekeeper, led her once again to the library, where Nathan stood near the fireplace, a glass of water in his hand, not a trace of surprise on his face when she entered. Miss Bennett, he greeted, his voice a calm current. You came. I said I'd think about it, she replied, stepping into the room and removing her gloves. I've thought. He waited. I'll do it. A small nod, no reaction, no triumph, no relief, just acceptance. Nathan didn't deal in feelings, at least not in any way that showed. There will be documents, he said, agreements, boundaries. I assume you'll want to have them reviewed. I will, she replied, but not because I don't trust you, because I want to trust myself. That made him pause. A flicker of something passed behind his eyes, maybe admiration, maybe concern. You're free to live your life, he continued. Friends, classes, goals. Nothing changes unless you want it to. And you? She asked, crossing her arms. What do you expect out of this? He was quiet for a moment, then said, that we fulfill the clause discreetly, with dignity, that you have access to your inheritance, and I carry out my duty to Charles. His words were precise, like every syllable had been weighed before spoken, but still, there was a wall around him, not just legal or emotional, something deeper, older. She studied him in silence. You knew my grandfather well. I did. And you agreed to this. To be my legal guardian. Marry me for a will? I agreed to honor his wishes and yours, if you chose to proceed. That careful choice of words again. Do you always separate yourself from what you feel? She asked softly. His expression shifted, just barely. Feelings complicate law, and I've built a career out of staying clear. Her chest tightened at that. What kind of life must that be? As he stepped to the desk, pulling out a folder, Sophia's eyes scanned the room, and for the first time, she noticed the photo on the shelf. An old picture, black and white, a boy no older than 10, standing between two solemn-faced adults. Nathan, even as a child, looked formal, alone even in company. I'll sign, she said. He handed her the paper. No rush, he said, but the wedding would need to happen within the next 60 days to avoid complications with the estate. 60 days. She swallowed the weight of that number. Will there be guests? No, he said, unless you wish to invite someone. I don't. And he nodded, as if that aligned perfectly with what he had expected. The wedding day came like winter without fanfare, without softness. They stood in the registry office downtown, surrounded by the sterile hush of government halls. No flowers, no music, just a judge Sophia had never seen before, reading words that were meant to bind hearts but now served only as formality. Nathan wore a charcoal suit, the same one he wore in court, perhaps. Sophia wore a powder blue dress that had once belonged to her grandmother. The sleeves were a little loose, the waist a little tight, but it made her feel like someone was watching over her. They signed the papers, said the vows. No one cried, no one smiled. When the judge asked them to seal the ceremony with a kiss, Nathan hesitated, only for a second, then leaned in and touched his lips to hers, soft, distant. A brush more than a kiss, a contract more than a promise. Then it was done. Mrs. Carver was the one waiting for them at home with 2 glasses of sparkling water and a tray of lemon biscuits. Nathan excused himself with the formality of a man returning to a business meeting. Your room is ready, Mrs. Harrington, the housekeeper said gently. Sophia flinched at the name. She followed her down a quiet hallway, away from the main wing, past paintings she hadn't noticed before, landscapes, empty roads, misty hills. Every piece in the house seemed to reflect Nathan's soul, beautiful but unreachable. The room was large, immaculately kept. A 4-poster bed with pale linen, a window that overlooked the garden, a desk, a reading nook. Every corner spoke of solitude. As she stood by the window, rain beginning to tap against the glass, Sophia felt the weight of it all settle over her. She was 20 years old, married to a man who didn't want her, bound to a house that didn't feel like home, in possession of an inheritance that now felt like a burden. And yet, there was something else. Something she couldn't explain. A curiosity. A question. A pull. Who was this man behind the judge's mask? What had made him so careful with his emotions? And would anything or anyone ever be enough to break through? The days after the ceremony unfolded like pages from a story neither of them had written, yet both were now living inside. At the Harrington estate, life resumed with quiet predictability. Nathan woke at 6 a.m., left the house precisely by 6:45, and returned home just past 8, 0-inch the evening. Sophia, in contrast, filled her time with lectures at the university, study sessions at the library, and long walks through the crisp air of Beacon Hill, all in an attempt to silence the chaos within. They saw each other but rarely spoke. Meals were taken separately, their schedules, though not deliberately opposite, never seemed to overlap by chance. But even in that silence, a strange rhythm was forming, one neither of them fully understood, yet neither could ignore. One evening, a soft knock came at Sophia's door. She had just returned from campus, her bag still on the floor, coat draped over the chair, her hair in a loose braid, cheeks flushed from the wind. She paused before answering. It was Nathan. He stood in the hallway, as composed as always, though something in his stance, hands clasped behind his back, weight slightly shifted, betrayed hesitation. I wanted to ask, he began, if you'd be available to have dinner tonight? With me? Her brows lifted slightly. Dinner? He nodded once. Here. Just us. I thought it might be appropriate. After everything. A long second passed. Then another. I'll come, she said simply. Downstairs, the dining room was lit, with soft amber lighting, not romantic, just warm enough to feel less clinical than usual. A table for 2 had been set near the fireplace. The kind of detail Sophia suspected had been arranged by Mrs. Carver. She arrived a few minutes late, on purpose, and when she entered, Nathan stood. She noticed it then how he looked different outside the courtroom setting. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled once. He looked less like a judge and more like a man. You look nice, he said. Sophia tilted her head. That almost sounded like a compliment. Because it was, he replied without irony. She sat across from him, unsure of how to interpret his tone. The meal began in silence, with light dishes served by the housekeeper and then quietly withdrawn. It wasn't until the main course that Sophia spoke. Do you always live like this? She asked, twirling her fork lightly. So much space, so few people. Nathan glanced around. It suits me. It suits isolation, she thought. His eyes met hers. I didn't realize you were studying psychology now. I'm studying people, she said, her voice steady, and silence says a lot. His jaw tensed, only slightly. And what does mine say? That you don't want to be seen. Not really. He leaned back. That's an assumption. It's a feeling, she countered. And I've learned not to ignore mine. The air thickened between them, not with anger but something electric. Sophia held his gaze, refusing to look away first. Then Nathan exhaled, just a subtle shift, and the corners of his mouth lifted, barely. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A frightened girl, desperate for her inheritance? Sophia arched a brow. And what did you plan to do with a frightened girl? He didn't answer, not because he didn't have one, but because the question itself had pulled something too close to the surface. She placed her fork down gently. I didn't choose this, but I'm not going to be reduced to a legal arrangement. I never intended. You don't have to intend to make someone feel invisible, she said, her voice softer now. Sometimes silence does that on its own. Another pause. Nathan looked at her across the table, and for the first time, there was no shield in his expression. Just a flicker of something unguarded, regret, maybe, or recognition. I'll try, he said quietly. It was not dramatic, not grand, but it was the first real thing he'd offered her. After dinner, she helped clear her own plate, refused assistance. Then, in the hallway outside the dining room, she paused. I know this wasn't what either of us wanted, she said, but I'm here now, and I'm not going to disappear just because you find it easier to pretend I'm not. Nathan nodded slowly. That's fair. She started up the stairs, then stopped midway and turned. You don't scare me, Nathan, she said, and you don't impress me either. His expression didn't change, but his breath did a quiet inhale. I'm not here to impress, he replied. Then we might get along just fine. With that, she disappeared around the corner, leaving him standing there, listening to the quiet echo of her footsteps fading into the upper floor. Later that night, Nathan stood at the window of his study, sipping scotch, watching the rain trace lines across the glass. She was right. He had tried to reduce her to a contract, a duty, a formality. But she had defied every expectation, not with arrogance, but with quiet fire. She wasn't loud, but she was powerful, and worse, she made him feel things he had long ago silenced, and now he didn't know how to silence them again. The legal marriage of Sophia and Nathan had been filed, registered, and stamped by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a process so swift and emotionless, it barely made a ripple in the grand scheme of their lives. But within the four walls of the Harrington estate, it was as if something had shifted in the foundation, not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. There was no honeymoon, no photos, no change of relationship status, just two people inhabiting the same space under a contract neither of them would ever dare call romantic. Sophia moved into her designated suite, a private wing tucked away behind a long corridor, complete with bedroom, bathroom, study nook, and a small terrace that overlooked the back gardens. It was stunning, isolated, immaculate, and utterly cold. The silence in the house was oppressive. Footsteps echoed, doors clicked shut, like secrets being hidden. The staff moved quietly, always respectful, always distant. They referred to her now as Mrs. Harrington, and every time Sophia heard it, it felt like trying on a name that didn't belong to her. Nathan, true to his word, kept his distance. He left early for court, returned late, and never intruded on her side of the house. She rarely saw him, except at the occasional dinner they shared in muted formality, speaking only about schedules, weather, and news headlines. And yet, something was happening beneath the surface. It began with small things, subtle gestures. A fresh stack of law books left on her desk, all annotated with tabs and notes, in neat, concise handwriting. Nathan's handwriting. Then came the cup of chamomile tea that appeared on her windowsill every evening around 10 o'clock, without fail, no explanation, no words, but it was there, always warm. And then there were the glances, not frequent, not obvious, but heavy with something unnamed. One afternoon, Sophia walked into the library to return a book and found Nathan seated in the armchair, reading. He looked up, startled. It was the first time she'd seen him without a jacket, sleeves rolled to the forearms, collar slightly loosened. I didn't know you were in here, she said. "I often am," he replied, closing the book slowly. "It's the only room that doesn't feel empty." She sat on the opposite couch without asking, picked up a novel. They read in silence for nearly an hour, pages turning softly, no conversation, no closeness. But when she stood to leave, she felt the weight of his eyes lingering on her back. Another night. It rained. Thunder rolled over the city, rattling the windows. Sophia stood by the terrace door, watching the garden blur into gray, when she noticed something. Nathan, outside, without an umbrella, walking slowly beneath the storm. She watched as he stopped under the oak tree, the one that stood like a monument at the edge of the estate, and tilted his face to the sky. He looked so alone, so human, and for the first time, she wondered what kind of grief he was carrying, what had made a man like him choose solitude so fiercely. The next morning, she left a folded note beside his breakfast plate. "There's something therapeutic about letting the rain hit you when no one is watching. I understand that more than you think." She never saw him read it, but the next evening, when she returned to her suite, there was a small vase of white peonies on her desk, her mother's favorite flower. Nathan couldn't have known that unless he'd asked or remembered. Still, words were scarce. They danced around each other like polite strangers at a masquerade ball, never daring to unmask the truth. Sophia grew used to the silence, but never comfortable with it. She wanted to scream some nights, slam a door, demand something real, but she didn't, because she knew Nathan wasn't ready, and neither was she. Until one evening, a Friday, everything shifted. They were both home earlier than usual, a rare overlap in schedules. Mrs. Carver had prepared dinner and excused herself early. The dining room felt larger than usual, the chandelier above them casting golden shadows on the dark mahogany table. Halfway through the meal, Nathan spoke. "I was offered a seat on the appellate court." Sophia looked up, surprised. "That's major. Congratulations. I haven't accepted." "Why not?" He hesitated. "It would require me to move to Washington. It would mean more exposure, politics, compromise. And you're not a man who compromises easily." He looked at her then, fully, openly. "No, I'm not." She set her fork down. "Do you want it?" "I don't know anymore." That answer told her more about him than anything else had so far. A long silence followed, but it wasn't cold, it was contemplative, honest. "I think," Sophia said, "you're afraid that if you stop controlling everything will fall apart." His jaw tightened slightly. "That's a dangerous thing to say to a judge." "It's not dangerous if it's true." He didn't respond but didn't deflect either. That night, as she walked up the staircase, he spoke again. "Do you regret it?" She stopped halfway up, turned to him. "Regret what? This? Us? This arrangement?" She looked at him from the stairs, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I regret that I had to get married to inherit what should have always been mine. But no, I don't regret you." Their eyes locked, and for the first time, something between them softened, not completely, but enough to let in light. She turned and continued up to her room. Nathan stood at the bottom of the stairs, unmoving, as if trying to hold on to the sound of her voice a little longer. The Harrington mansion moved with the precision of a well-wound clock. Every sound was muted, footsteps on the polished floors, distant clicks of doors opening and closing, the quiet hum of lamps turning on at dusk. It was a house that had been designed to be efficient, not warm, to impress, not comfort. Yet, for the first time in years, it was inhabited by two people whose presence began to disrupt that perfect stillness, not with noise, but with tension, with possibility. Sophia found herself adapting to the rhythm of the mansion, learning its language, the way the air changed when Nathan was near, how his cologne lingered faintly in the hallway, how even the placement of a book or a teacup hinted at his unspoken thoughts. They never discussed the nature of their arrangement, never brought up the wedding. It was easier to pretend that it was all a legal technicality, a detour in both their lives. But the house and the space between them told another story. In the mornings, Sophia would come down to find the newspaper already open to the legal section and a fresh cup of coffee prepared just the way she liked it. Cinnamon, no sugar, extra milk. She never saw Nathan make it, but it was always there, always warm. He, in turn, began to notice her presence in the smallest details. Books from the lower shelf now placed back meticulously, her vinyl record playing softly in the music room on Sunday mornings, usually jazz, sometimes classical, depending on her mood. One evening, she even left a folded sweater draped over the back of the armchair he preferred in the library. He didn't comment, but he wore it the next night. There was no intimacy, but there was awareness, a growing one. One evening, Sophia was in the kitchen late, making herself a grilled cheese, something that reminded her of her childhood, of nights when things were simple. She didn't expect Nathan to walk in, barefoot, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked at the sandwich, then at her. "Is that dinner?" "It's nostalgia." He gave a rare, faint smile. "May I?" She blinked. "You want a bite?" He stepped forward, took half without waiting for her to offer, and bit into it. There was something oddly domestic about the scene, like they had done this before, like they were something. "It's good," he said, mouth still half full. "Better than most things Carver makes." She'd be offended. She'd agree. They stood in silence for a moment, side by side, the kitchen light casting warm shadows across the marble counters. Then he asked, unexpectedly, "Are you happy here?" She didn't answer immediately, took another bite, swallowed slowly. "I'm not unhappy." "That's not the same. I didn't expect it to be," she said, looking at him. "Did you?" "No," he admitted. She nodded and walked past him toward the hallway, her plate empty, her heart too full. The days grew shorter. Winter was settling in. Sophia's classes became more demanding. She spent late nights in her study, often falling asleep at the desk. More than once, she'd wake to find a folded blanket draped over her shoulders, no note, no sound. But she knew it was Nathan. He, on the other hand, began lingering longer in the rooms she occupied, not in a way that intruded, but in a way that suggested something was shifting, like he was drawn to her presence and didn't know what to do with that. Sometimes, she caught him watching her when she spoke on the phone or while she read by the fire. His gaze was never invasive, just searching, quietly fascinated. They had become two souls circling the same orbit, refusing to collide but no longer content with the distance. Then came the night when Sophia's voice cracked. She was studying for a major exam, papers scattered across the desk, highlighters bleeding through notes. She'd been at it for hours, sleep-deprived, tense, when she dropped her laptop charger, and it snapped in two. It was the last straw. She swore under her breath and sat down hard on the floor, her back against the wall, tears burning the corners of her eyes. Nathan appeared in the doorway seconds later, drawn by the noise or perhaps by something deeper. He didn't say anything, just crouched down beside her. "Don't," she said, wiping her face quickly. "Please, I'm fine. You're not." She laughed bitterly. "I married a stranger to get into a house I don't even feel at home in. I sleep in a room no one visits. I talk to walls more than people, and I study for exams like they're the only thing keeping me sane. But yes, I'm fine." It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was exhaustion, the kind that made you question if you were really living or just surviving. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he sat beside her on the floor. "I don't know how to fix that," he said, "but I don't want you to feel this way. Not here. Not with me." She turned her head slightly, just enough to see the sincerity in his profile. "You don't even know me." He met her eyes. "I'm trying to." Silence fell again, but this time it was different, not heavy, not cold, just still. After a while, Sophia rested her head on her knees, and Nathan didn't move. He just stayed, sitting on the floor of the study like it was the most natural thing in the world. Later, when she stood to leave, he helped her up gently, his hand lingering for just a second longer than necessary. Neither of them said good night. They didn't need to, because for the first time since the day they signed the papers, something unspoken had changed, and it would not go unnoticed. The invitation had arrived on thick ivory cardstock, embossed with gold lettering, the kind of formality reserved for Boston's most exclusive legal circles. The annual winter gala of the Massachusetts Association of Magistrates, hosted at the Ritz-Carlton. Nathan attended every year, it was expected, a tradition wrapped in protocol, pleasantries, and unspoken rivalries. He hadn't planned on bringing Sophia, but something shifted when he saw the envelope resting on his desk that morning. He didn't ask her directly. He simply left the card by her coffee, a silent offer, an open door. That evening, as he stood adjusting his cufflinks in front of the bedroom mirror, he reminded himself again that this was just another event, another evening of handshakes and nods. His job was to show up, speak politely, leave early. He hadn't prepared for what he felt when she entered the hallway. Sophia was wearing a deep emerald green dress, modest in cut but devastating in its simplicity. Her hair was pulled back into a low twist, with a few loose strands framing her face. She wore no necklace, no loud makeup, just confidence and poise, and something in her eyes that had nothing to do with marriage or contracts. Nathan froze. "You clean up well," she said softly, adjusting her earring as she reached for her clutch. He cleared his throat. "So do you." She smiled faintly. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not," he said, but he was. In the car ride to the Ritz, silence hovered again. But it was different now, charged, full of things unsaid. When they arrived, heads turned. People whispered. That was expected. Nathan never brought anyone, never dated publicly, never appeared with a woman on his arm. And now he walked through the ballroom with Sophia, poised and calm, like she had always belonged in that world. The evening unfolded in practiced elegance. Speeches, toasts, conversations over wine, and flickering candles. Sophia moved gracefully, introducing herself without apology, holding her ground even when questioned by judges 3 times her age. Nathan watched her more than he meant to the way she carried herself, the intelligence behind her answers, the way she didn't shrink in the face of expectation but rather rose to meet it without a hint of arrogance. Then came the moment. It was subtle, sharp, cruel. One of the wives, an older woman known for her ice-laced comments, leaned close to Sophia and asked with false sweetness, "Forgive me, dear, I just have to ask, what exactly does one do after marrying a judge? Do you read the law to each other before bed?" The table chuckled. Polite. Controlled. Nathan felt the tension in his spine. He opened his mouth to respond, but Sophia was faster. She smiled gently and leaned in just enough to be heard. "I find that the truly strong men don't need to impress with their power. They protect their softness. That's the kind of man I married." Silence, then a stunned chuckle, and finally applause not loud, but sincere from one of the older female judges across the table. Nathan sat very still. The room around him blurred for a moment. The chandelier lights softened, and all he could see was her Sophia. She hadn't just defended him, she had seen him, the man behind the black robe, the man who hadn't known he still needed someone to believe he was more than a verdict machine. When the evening wound down and the guests began to drift toward the exits, Nathan lingered by the ballroom doors, waiting for Sophia to return from speaking with a group of law students. She approached, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Ready?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just looked at her. "Really look. What you said earlier, I meant it," she replied without blinking. A long pause. "I don't remember the last time anyone said something like that about me," he said. "Then maybe it's time someone did." They left the Ritz in silence, but it was the kind that follows a revelation. Back at the mansion, the house was dark and still. Sophia turned to head toward her wing, but Nathan stopped her at the base of the stairs. "Wait." She turned. He hesitated, his hand half lifted before falling back to his side. "I used to think that strength was about being immovable, untouched. But you, tonight, you showed me something else." "What did I show you?" she asked. Voice barely above a whisper. "That maybe strength is knowing when to let someone see you." Their eyes held. It wasn't a confession, it wasn't a declaration, but it was a crack, a small one in a wall that had stood for too long. She gave him a small nod, then turned and ascended the stairs. Nathan remained there, alone in the dim light of the entry hall, wondering why, after all these years of control, the only thing he couldn't reason through was her, and what terrified him more was the growing truth he could no longer ignore. He didn't just admire Sophia. He was starting to feel something he didn't know how to stop. It started with a headache, nothing dramatic, just a dull throb behind Sophia's eyes after a long day of lectures and cold Boston wind. She brushed it off, telling herself it was the weather, the stress, the late nights reading until her eyes blurred. But by morning, her body betrayed her. The fever came slowly, then fiercely. Her skin burned, her throat ached. The mansion, usually cool and echoing, felt like a furnace. She stayed in bed, shivering under layers of blankets, too weak to get up, too proud to call for help. Mrs. Carver was the one who alerted Nathan. "She won't let me bring in a doctor," the housekeeper said, worried, "and she hasn't eaten since yesterday." Nathan didn't answer immediately. He stood by his office window, jaw tight, fingers curled around the edge of the desk. "She's a grown woman," he said, almost out of habit. "She's also your wife," Carver replied softly, "even if it's only on paper." The words struck something deeper than he expected. He found himself at Sophia's door 5 minutes later. He knocked once. No answer. "Sophia," his voice was low, uncertain. "I'm coming in." She lay curled under the covers, face pale, strands of hair clinging to her damp forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, just barely. "You shouldn't see me like this," she murmured, voice hoarse. "You think I haven't seen someone with a fever before?" he asked, stepping inside. She tried to sit up, wincing. "Don't," he said gently. "Just rest." For a moment, she didn't argue. That alone told him how bad it really was. He sat on the edge of the bed, placed the back of his hand against her cheek. She was burning. "I'm fine," she whispered. "You're not," he replied. He stood, his movements precise but quick. "I'm getting what we need." That afternoon passed in quiet urgency. Nathan took charge not with commands, but with care. He called the family physician, monitored her temperature, arranged for medication, changed her damp pillowcases with a kind of gentleness that felt almost surreal in a man known for issuing federal rulings without blinking. When she shivered, he brought extra blankets. When she grew too hot, he wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. He stayed with her all night. In those hours, Sophia drifted in and out of fevered sleep, but even in the haze, she was aware of him the way he read quietly in the armchair when she dozed, the way he stood by the window, watching the moonlight move across the garden, the way he looked at her when he thought she couldn't see. She caught a glimpse of it once, that look. It wasn't fear or obligation. It was something far more dangerous. It was tenderness. On the second night, her fever broke. She woke at dawn, weak but lucid. The bedroom was still dim, and Nathan sat by her bedside, eyes closed, chin resting on his fist, half asleep. She turned slightly. "You stayed." His eyes opened slowly. "Of course I did." "Even though you had court?" He shrugged. "They managed without me." A pause. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I hate being weak." He shook his head. "You're not weak. You're human." She let her eyes close again, overwhelmed by the warmth in his voice. Then something happened she hadn't expected. Nathan reached out slowly, like he wasn't sure he had permission, and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "You scared me," he said quietly. Her heart skipped. He wasn't a man who admitted fear. "What were you afraid of?" she asked, barely above her breath. He didn't answer right away. "That I'd lose you before I ever really had the chance to know you." Her breath caught. She opened her eyes again, searching his face. "What are we doing, Nathan?" Another pause. He looked away for a moment, toward the window. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to stop." His words hung in the air like mist, not quite a confession, not quite a promise, but they shifted something between them. Later that day, as she rested more comfortably, she found a small folded note on her nightstand in Nathan's crisp handwriting. "Strength isn't the absence of illness. It's allowing someone to care when you're too tired to pretend." She stared at it for a long time, and for the first time since entering that house, Sophia didn't feel like an obligation. She felt cherished. That night, Nathan stood outside her room again, unsure whether to knock. But before he could decide, the door opened, and Sophia stood there in her robe, pale but smiling faintly. "I think I could manage some tea," she said. He stepped aside. "Then let's make it together." They walked toward the kitchen, side by side, still wrapped in the quiet of unspoken truths. The mansion, once so cold and impersonal, now held the memory of warm cloths, sleepless nights, and hands that reached out not for duty but for connection. Neither of them said it aloud, but something irreversible had begun. The days that followed Sophia's recovery were quieter, but not in the same way as before. The silence between her and Nathan now had a different sound, the sound of shared breath, of an emotional space that, although still undefined, could no longer be denied. He returned to work but now sent short messages during the day, simple things. "Did you have coffee? Did you rest enough?" She always responded with a touch of soft irony. But there was something new in the way she waited for those messages, as if the habit of being remembered had found a place in her heart. Nathan also changed. He became more present without intruding, more attentive without suffocating. The silences between them stopped being walls and started becoming bridges, but it was the unexpected that tested this new bond. One cold Friday afternoon, Sophia was at university, giving an oral presentation before a demanding panel. The room was crowded, the heat from the radiators contrasting with the cold air from the corridor. She had slept little, eaten even less, and though she was determined to maintain her composure, her body had other plans. The words started to jumble. Her vision blurred, and then, suddenly, everything went black. She collapsed, her dry, silent faint too quick for anyone to catch. When Nathan received the call from the university's secretary, he was in the middle of a meeting. As soon as he heard Sophia's name and the word fainting, he stood up without offering an explanation. His colleagues watched as he left, tie loosened, phone in hand, his face a mixture of panic and urgency. He drove like a man out of his mind. The university hospital was 20 minutes from the mansion. Nathan arrived in 12, ignoring the parking lot, throwing the keys at the valet without a glance. He ran up the stairs, something he hadn't done in years. The receptionist tried to stop him, but his last name was all it took to let him through. She was in observation, lying on a stretcher, connected to monitors. When he entered, he felt something break inside him. Seeing Sophia there, pale, fragile, motionless, was more than a shock. It was a blow. He stepped closer, gently touching her hand, and whispered, "You can't scare me like this." She opened her eyes slowly, still dizzy, still in the space between dreams and reality. But she saw him there, eyes filled with tears, breath uneven, fear written across his face. "Nathan," she tried to say, but her voice was too soft. "Shh," he murmured, holding her hand between his. "I'm here. It's over." The nurse came in shortly after with the test results. Low blood pressure, exhaustion, no serious risk, but complete rest was advised. "You have any idea what I felt when they told me you collapsed?" Nathan asked after they were alone. She tried to smile. "I didn't know you cared like this." He stood up and began pacing the room, a gesture of someone needing to channel something larger than logic. "It's not just concern, Sophia. It's not just that. When I found out, my heart stopped. I thought I'd lost you." She watched him, not just by the words but by the tone. He wasn't acting. He wasn't rehearsing. This was real. "You feel something for me," she said bluntly. Nathan froze. He turned slowly. "I don't know how it happened," he said, "but yes, I feel more than I thought I could after everything." She tried to sit up, but he moved to her side and helped her gently, propping up the pillows behind her back. "And you?" he asked, eyes fixed on hers. "Do you feel something for me?" Sophia took a deep breath. "I feel fear of surrendering to someone who's built walls so high. But also, I feel something I can't pretend isn't here anymore." He moved closer, kneeling before her stretcher, as if he were finally ready to lay down the control, the armor, the title. "You're the only thing that makes me want to come down from these walls." She touched his face, a light touch, her fingers still fragile but firm enough for him to feel that she was choosing him not by contract, not by convenience, but by connection. "Don't leave tonight," she said. Nathan raised his eyes, surprised. "Stay with me," she added. "Just stay." He nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, in the hospital room, Nathan pulled up a chair and held Sophia's hand until she fell asleep. He didn't look at the clock. He didn't think about the court. For the first time in a long time, nothing else mattered but her. As the heart monitor pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, he stared at the ceiling and whispered, perhaps to himself, perhaps to someone no longer there, "I realized that losing you out of fear would be worse than loving you with all the risks." The rain started before sunset, a thin, persistent curtain, as if the sky itself was trying to wash away everything that had been trapped for too long. Sophia was back at the mansion. The hospital had cleared her for discharge, and Nathan insisted on taking her himself, driving slowly, without a word, as if every minute of silence between them spoke louder than any phrase. As they entered the house, something felt different, not in the environment. The marble still gleamed, the chandeliers still hung with grandeur from the high ceilings, and the air still smelled of polished wood and subtle lavender. But there was something between them, a dense yet soft tension, a magnetic field that no longer allowed for disguises. Sophia slowly climbed to her room, guided by Nathan's hands, which, though firm, seemed hesitant, as if still asking, "Is it allowed to feel all of this?" Upstairs, the bedside lamp cast long shadows on the walls. She sat at the edge of the bed, her hair still damp from the drizzle, her eyes lowered. Nathan stood in front of her, as if searching for the courage he always had in the courtroom but now escaped him in the face of a simple gesture to truly touch someone. She lifted her eyes. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked softly, almost shyly. "Because I'm trying to memorize how you are right now," he said, before everything changes. A silence enveloped them. She stood up, took 2 steps, until she was standing right before him. "And if I told you it has already changed?" she whispered. He didn't answer with words. His fingers touched hers, then they gently traveled up her arm, as if not wanting to invade but instead ask for permission. Sophia didn't pull back. Quite the opposite. Her eyes closed for a moment, as if granting it. The kiss came afterwards, slow, delicate, no urgency, no haste. It was a kiss of recognition, of acceptance, of surrender. Nathan placed his hands on her face, sliding his thumbs across her cheekbones, as if he were drawing her anew with his touch. Sophia, in response, placed her fingers at the collar of his shirt, slowly unbuttoning it with the reverence of someone opening something sacred. The night moved forward with soft steps. The bed stood as a silent witness to 2 souls that had, for so long, hidden behind walls made of fear, independence, and pain. Now those walls crumbled one by one, with each touch, each shared breath, each sustained glance in the dark. He wasn't in a rush. She had no doubts. Their bodies met, but it was in the pauses that love was born, in the way he covered her with the sheet after kissing her stomach, in the way she whispered, "I'm here," when she felt his hands tremble, in the way they both cried in silence. Not out of sadness, but of relief. It was more than desire. It was the beginning of something real, something neither of them had dared to name until then. Hours later, with their bodies intertwined beneath the sheets and the window still streaked with rain, Nathan spoke. "I spent my whole life thinking that loving meant losing control." Sophia turned on her side, resting her face against his chest. "And now? Now I think not loving is what takes everything away from us." She didn't say anything. She simply held his hand and interlaced her fingers with his. And for the first time in many years, Nathan fell asleep without fear. But love, no matter how deep, still carries the scars of the past, and the next morning, in the light of day, the armor he had left on the floor began to reappear. The morning arrived wrapped in an almost illusory calm. The sky in Boston was clear after the night of rain. The Harrington mansion's garden glistened under dewdrops. Everything seemed new, silent, serene, but inside the house, the atmosphere was different. Sophia woke up alone. The bed still held the warmth from the previous night, the sheets wrinkled, and the memory of intertwined bodies. But Nathan wasn't there. Not in the room, not in the hallway, not in the kitchen, where only a solitary cup of coffee cooled on the counter. She slowly put on her robe, trying not to rush. Maybe he had left early. Maybe he was just avoiding building expectations. But deep down, a bitter feeling was starting to form. When she went down to the library, she found the first clue of the distance between them. The book he had been reading the night before was back on the shelf in its rightful place, as if it had never been opened, and on the table, a file with legal documents he had been reviewing for weeks, everything in place, everything impersonal, everything back to control. When she finally found him in his office, he was standing, his back turned, looking out the window, the same man as before, impeccable suit, tense shoulders, mask back on. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound light. He turned slowly. "Good morning." That was it. No smile, no closeness, no trace of the night they had shared. She waited for him to say something, anything, but all she got was silence. And that's when she knew he was running again. "Are you really going to pretend nothing happened?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Nathan didn't answer immediately. His gaze wandered around the room before it returned to her eyes. "It was a mistake, Sophia." The words fell between them like broken glass. She blinked slowly. "A mistake? I let myself get carried away. I lost focus. This shouldn't have happened." She crossed her arms. "You lost focus? Or you lost control?" He took a deep breath but didn't answer. "You told me you were afraid of loving, and last night, you didn't have that fear," she continued, her throat tightening. "But now, with the sun rising, all of that becomes a threat again, doesn't it?" "You don't understand." "No," she interrupted. "I understand perfectly. You prefer the safety of feeling nothing. You prefer solitude because no one can disappoint you there, not even yourself." His silence confirmed everything. Sophia took 2 steps back, her eyes watery. "Thank you for showing me who you really are." And then she went upstairs. She entered the room, packed her bags calmly. Each movement a silent goodbye. She folded the dresses that had never been worn, packed the books she had bought to study in the garden, set aside the mug he had given her, and left it on the nightstand. She wouldn't take memories that hurt. When Mrs. Carver found her in the hallway, Sophia was already holding the car keys. "Where are you going, dear?" "Far enough from where I'm not welcome," she replied with no anger, just exhaustion. The housekeeper's eyes lowered. She simply nodded. But before Sophia could pass through the door, she handed her an envelope. "He asked me to keep this for you. He wrote it weeks ago. I don't know why or when, but I think now is the right time." Sophia took the envelope but didn't open it, not yet. She went to her best friend Emma's apartment in downtown Boston. In the first few days, she didn't speak much. She only slept, ate little, studied to keep her mind occupied. But the silence gnawed at her because it wasn't just disappointment, it was the mourning of something that had just begun to bloom and had been torn away before it could fully blossom. She looked at the envelope every day, without courage to open it, without certainty that she wanted to hear what he had to say before destroying her with his words. Until 5 days later, it happened. It was late afternoon, the sky heavy, and she was returning from school, walking alone down the block where she used to catch the subway. It happened too quickly for her to notice. 2 men, an attempted mugging, a shove, a fall, a whispered threat in her ear, and then the sound of tires screeching to a halt. The voice, "Let her go." It was Nathan, in a suit, unarmed. With the most dangerous eyes she had ever seen, one of the attackers ran. The other hesitated, and within seconds, Nathan was on top of him, protecting Sophia with his body, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The police arrived shortly after, but Sophia could barely hear what they were saying. She only heard her heartbeat. She only felt his hands holding hers. "Are you okay?" he repeated. She nodded, her eyes full of tears. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, her voice trembling. He took a deep breath. "Because even when you left, I never stopped looking for you. I could never stop worrying." She looked at him for a few seconds. After everything, still, he was there. Why? Nathan. And it was right there, in the middle of the wet street, with sirens in the background and the sky heavy with clouds, that he said, "Because realizing that losing you out of fear would be far worse than loving you with all the risks." The night that followed the assault was filled with different silences, not the cold, defensive silences of before, but silences that welcomed, that healed, that said without words, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Nathan insisted on staying with Sophia at the hospital for tests, even after the doctors assured him that she was physically fine. He stayed by the stretcher, holding her hand, his eyes fixed on her as if he feared she might vanish if he blinked for too long. She said nothing. She didn't ask for explanations, didn't demand answers. But she didn't pull her hand away. And that said a lot. It was only in the parking lot, hours later, that Nathan finally broke the silence. "Do you want to go home?" The question wasn't an imposition, it was an invitation, a request. Sophia looked at him, serious. "Which home?" Nathan took a deep breath. "The one that isn't just made of walls, the one that starts when you walk in, and I'm truly there." She held his gaze for a few seconds, then nodded without saying anything. And that's how they returned together. At the mansion, everything seemed the same but also different, as if the place had absorbed Sophia's absence and was now reorganizing itself around her, around them. Nathan changed, not in a performative way, but in essence. He began waiting for her at breakfast, taking her to university personally, listening to her stories from the day with real attention, not just physical presence, but emotional investment. And most notably, he began to express how he felt with words, with eyes that no longer looked away from hers, with touches that came without hesitation. One afternoon, seeing her in the library underlining a criminal law book, he entered with a cup of tea in his hands and said, "I'm very proud of you." She looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because you don't give up," he replied. "Not on yourself, not on me." She smiled, the smile that came from the corners of her eyes, and he felt again that this was the right place, the right choice. 2 weeks later, he invited her to dinner, not in the house's silent dining room, but in the backyard, under a sky embroidered with stars, with candles lit and soft music playing in the background. Sophia found the atmosphere strange but didn't question it. She wore a light dress, her hair pinned to the side, her skin illuminated by the moonlight. Nathan looked at her as if she were the center of his entire existence. After dessert, he stood slowly, pulling something from the pocket of his suit jacket, a small navy blue box. Sophia froze. "Nathan," she said, but he shushed her with a calm smile. "This time, there's no will, no deadlines, no clauses." He knelt down. There was no audience, no formality, just truth. "I fell in love with you in the details," he began, "in the silences, in the way you walk through the house without asking for permission, in the way you confront me without fear, and most of all, in the way you saw me even when I still couldn't see myself." She brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes shining. "Sophia," he continued, "will you marry me for real? No obligations, no contracts, just us and everything we are, with imperfections, with courage, with love." She didn't respond immediately. She slowly got off the chair, knelt in front of him, and took his hands out of his pockets. "Yes," she said. Her voice choked, but with one condition. Nathan furrowed his brow, surprised. "That you never tell me again that love is a mistake." He smiled. "Never again." And there, under the sky of Boston, between the spring breeze and the scars of the past, two hearts that once came together by duty now beat together by choice, by decision, by love. But life, always life, still held one last revelation for them, one that would come as a surprise, as a blessing, and it would forever change the meaning of family. 1 year later, Boston blossomed in soft shades of spring, as if the entire city were breathing a little easier. The trees around Harvard wore light green. The park benches were filled with laughter, books, and freshly baked pastries from nearby bakeries. It was the season of new beginnings, and no one knew that better than Sophia. She stepped onto the stage of the auditorium with the steady steps of someone who had faced far more than exams and assignments to get there. Her eyes lit up when she spotted, among the audience, a man in a dark suit, slightly messy hair, and an expression that mixed pride, emotion, and silent devotion. Nathan. She held her diploma with both hands, not as a trophy, but as a symbol of overcoming, of persistence, of a love that started backward and found its way back to the truth. After the ceremony, they walked together to the car, surrounded by classmates and families. "So, public defender?" he asked, opening the door for her with a contained smile. "Yes," she replied, "one who believes in second chances." He looked at her sideways. "Is that a hint?" "Maybe," she said with that smile he knew so well. The following months brought a different kind of routine. Now, it wasn't about defensive silences or cautious gestures. It was about lunches at odd hours, new plants on the porch, Nathan reading her case files before bed, Sophia organizing his bookshelf by color just to annoy him, small fights, and even smaller reconciliations, because neither of them knew how to live in war with the other anymore. The Harrington mansion had transformed. The sound of her footsteps filled the hallways. The music Sophia played while cooking spilled into the rooms. Even Mrs. Carver started laughing more frequently. Time, instead of erasing, seemed to solidify the love between them. But nothing prepared them for what would come on a rainy April afternoon. Sophia had been feeling different for a few days, a tiredness that wouldn't go away, a subtle but recurring nausea. She tried to ignore it until the dizziness came during a hearing, forcing her to ask for a break and sit down for a few minutes. It was Emma, her friend, who suggested the test, just to rule it out, she said, handing Sophia a discreet pharmacy box. Sophia stared at the small object, as if holding a secret about to explode. When the second line appeared, the world stopped, silence, tears, and then laughter, a nervous laugh, surprised, incredulous. And then, a new feeling, a kind of love that didn't have a name yet. That night, she didn't tell him immediately. She waited for Nathan to come home, waited for him to take off his shoes, loosen his tie, sit on the couch with a glass of wine and the newspaper. She waited for the moment when he looked at her and said, almost instinctively, "You're different today." She walked over to him, sat beside him, took his hand, and gently placed it on her belly. "Because there are 3 of us now." Nathan froze. Time stopped for a long moment. He looked at her, his eyes wide, as if needing confirmation. Sophia nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "You're going to be a father, Nathan." And then, for the first time since she met him, he cried without shame. It wasn't a single tear. It was real tears from someone who once believed that love was a threat and now felt it as a blessing. The months that followed were a dance between expectations, plans, and fear. Nathan dove into books about fatherhood, home safety, breathing methods, and Sophia laughed at seeing him so methodical about the only thing in life he couldn't control. She, in turn, blossomed as a woman, as a wife, as a future mother, more serene, more confident, more at peace. In the last week of her pregnancy, the mansion's garden was renovated with new benches, wooden toys, paths between flowers, and a small cherry tree planted in the center. Nathan said that the first shade the baby would see should come from something alive, something that grows slowly but lasts for generations. And on the early hours of a quiet Monday, the baby arrived, a girl, skin as fair as her father's, eyes as intense as her mother's, dark, fine hair like both of them. They named her Lily not just for the light, but for the meaning. Something that is finally seen. In the last scene, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was the silence of a home after the baby falls asleep. A silence full of light, breathing, promises made in the dark, and steps learning to walk together. Nathan was kneeling beside the crib. Sophia watched him from the door. He held their little daughter's hand and whispered softly, "I'm your father, and I already love you more than anything in this world. You taught me that love is the beginning, not the end." Sophia closed her eyes. She knew that right there, in that room where everything was still to happen, two stories, once broken, had become one complete family. And it all started with a contract, but it was saved by the courage to be vulnerable and love for real. Not every love story begins with flowers. Some start with silence, fear, and cold contracts. But sometimes, what seems like nothing more than an obligation reveals a greater purpose to heal what's been broken, to uncover what's been hidden, and to show that true love doesn't arrive when everything is perfect. It arrives to transform. Nathan believed feeling was weakness. Sophia believed loving was a risk not worth taking. But together, they discovered that the most powerful strength isn't in protecting yourself, it's in allowing yourself to feel.